No room for you. My family said, but they always found a place for my sister and her family. That sentence wasn't said directly every time, but it was there unspoken but understood in the way my mother hesitated when I asked if I could stay the night during the holidays, in the tone she used when she told me the guest rooms were already assigned, in the silence that followed every time I asked how many people were invited before me. My name is Salma. I'm 35 now, but this story takes place over the course of nearly 10 years. I work in content production, mostly in creative campaign development for lifestyle brands, back then. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles. I had no husband, no children, no drama, and, apparently, no place at the family table. My older sister, Isabel, on the other hand, had all of those things married to a man named Daniel, who worked in finance and had just closed on a house in Malibu. They had 2 children, a golden retriever, and a life that looked very good on Christmas cards, and they were always welcome. I remember one year in particular. I must have been around 28. I'd just gotten a huge contract extension with the production agency I worked for. I was proud. I'd fought for that deal. I'd sacrificed weekends, sleep, and most of my early 20s to climb a ladder that was never meant for people like me, Latina. Independent, soft-spoken but sharp-edged, when I called home to tell my parents the news. My father offered a warm but brief, "That's great, Micha." My mother's first response was, "You'll still be able to come home for Christmas." Right, I said yes. Of course, I always said yes. I packed my small car with gifts I wrapped myself, cookies I baked after long shifts, and a suitcase filled with good intentions. I arrived 2 days before Christmas Eve. Isabel and her family had already been there for 3 days. They had taken over the upstairs bedrooms, and my old room, the one with the lilac walls, and the bookshelf my father built when I was 12, was being used as storage for Daniel's golf equipment. I was offered the couch that night. I lay on that couch with the TV glowing faintly in the corner, listening to laughter from upstairs. I stared at the ceiling, just like I had when I was a teenager, wondering how I could feel so distant from people who shared my blood. No one was cruel. They weren't abusive. They just forgot I was there. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else and went into the kitchen to make coffee. I found a sticky note on the counter. It read, "Salma, please, take the crystal glasses out for dinner. And remember, the gold-rimmed plates this year, not the regular china. Thanks. Mom." I made the coffee. I set the table. I helped prepare the roast, cleaned up the wrapping paper from the kids, organized the seating chart so Daniel's parents could sit near the fireplace, and didn't complain when I was assigned the small folding chair near the kitchen door. Nobody asked how my project was going, what my clients were like, or if I was happy. I tried to bring it up during dinner. I mentioned that our campaign for a new wellness app had been featured in Ad Week. Daniel nodded, but didn't ask more. My mom changed the topic to the ski trip Isabel was planning. My Aunt Camila laughed and said, "Maybe Salma should come too, though I'm not sure she skis or knows how to relax." Everyone chuckled. I did too. It was easier than saying how much it hurt. After dinner, I cleared the table. Isabel stayed in the living room, sipping wine and telling stories about her daughter's preschool play. My father fell asleep in his recliner. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway, inspecting my work. "Be careful with those glasses," she said. "They're expensive." So was my dignity, I thought, but no one had paid for that. That night, I went back to the couch and curled up with a throw blanket that smelled like cinnamon and forgotten things. I told myself that next year, I'd just book a hotel and make it easier for everyone. I wouldn't ask for a room. I wouldn't expect a place. I wouldn't try to belong where I clearly didn't. The part that stung the most wasn't the physical space. It was the emotional silence. The way everyone just assumed I'd be fine. The way no one saw how exhausted I was or how badly I needed someone to ask if I was okay. But in a family that measured worth by weddings and offspring, I was invisible, capable, single, childless Salma, reliable background character. That was the year I stopped expecting things to change. I still came home, but I came with walls. I smiled when I was told to help. I nodded when people ignored me, and I left early every time, pretending I had somewhere important to be. The truth was, I had nowhere to be, but I couldn't bear to be where I wasn't wanted. That Christmas ended the same way as always my sister and her family in the big family photo, my parents glowing with pride, and me holding the camera. That was before everything changed, the next year. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I told my mother I had a campaign deadline, which was technically true, but not the real reason. I just didn't want to sit through another dinner where Daniel explained the economy to everyone like he'd invented it, or where my mom passed around second servings to everyone except me. I stayed in my LA apartment, ate takeout from a Thai place down the street, and watched a movie by myself. It was quiet, but at least it wasn't humiliating. I thought maybe someone would notice. Maybe my mom would call and ask why I hadn't shown up. She didn't. A week later, I got a group text from her with pictures of Isabel's kids holding handmade turkey crafts. So thankful for family, the caption read. My name wasn't mentioned. My absence wasn't noted. I thought about that text while waiting for the elevator at work, holding a pitch deck I'd spent 4 days refining. I stared at the screen, at the smiling children I hadn't seen in months. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt distance, like I was floating outside the circle of people I once thought would always make room for me. By Christmas, my walls were higher. I didn't offer to drive. I didn't bring baked goods or hand-wrapped gifts. I bought whatever was on the kids' Amazon wish lists, paid for overnight shipping, and packed a small duffel bag with only the essentials. I told myself it was just a visit, not a homecoming. That helped. But nothing really prepared me for what came next. 2 days before Christmas Eve, I got a call from my mother. Her tone was polite, almost rehearsed. Salma, listen, things are a little crowded this year. Daniel's parents are flying in, and Isabel's college roommate is visiting with her twins. So, we thought it might be better if you stayed at a hotel this time. We just don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I paused. A hotel? Yes, just so you have your own space. You know, we already reserved one. It's nice, has good reviews. It took me a few seconds to speak. You reserved a hotel room for me. Yes, don't take it the wrong way. It's just logistics. You'll be more comfortable. I wanted to say 100 things. I wanted to ask why Isabel's friend had a bed in my parents' house, and I didn't. I wanted to ask why comfort was a concern now, but only for their guests, not for me. Not when I'd slept on the couch for years. But instead, I said, sure, thanks for letting me know. Wonderful, she said, her voice brightening with relief. We'll see you at dinner. I hung up and stared at the wall. A hotel. My mother had booked me out of her life like I was an afterthought on Expedia that night. I went for a long walk through my neighborhood, listening to strangers' Christmas lights hum faintly in the trees. I passed houses filled with families gathering, people talking on porches, music playing softly from behind windows. I thought about the effort I used to make trying to belong, trying to prove that being single and childless didn't mean being empty at some point. I stopped walking and stood outside a bookstore, staring at my own reflection in the window. I looked tired, not just from work, but from years of shrinking myself to fit a family that never made room for me. I went home and canceled my trip. I told my mother something had come up at work. She didn't ask questions, just said, "Okay, we'll miss you," in a tone that didn't sound like missing anything at all. I spent Christmas alone that year. I made a pot of soup, played Nina Simone on vinyl, and let myself cry for the first time in months. Not loud, not messy, just quiet tears that soaked into the blanket around my shoulders. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just tired of waiting to be seen. After the new year, something shifted, not in them and me. I began saying no more often. No to being the one who always visited first. No to pretending to be fine when they never asked if I was. I stopped offering updates unless someone asked, and no one did. I tested silence, no texts, no pictures, just absence, and it was met with silence in return. That spring, I led a campaign for a wellness brand that went viral. It was emotional, raw, built on the kind of storytelling I'd mastered from living between the lines of unspoken wounds. The campaign was nominated for an industry award. My boss took me out for dinner, toasted to the quiet ones who always deliver. I smiled, but inside, I wanted to say, "You have no idea." Because I wasn't just building content, I was building armor. One evening that summer, I got a voicemail from my mother, just checking in. She said, "Is everything all right? Isabel said she hasn't heard from you. Anyway, hope you're well." That was the first call in months. I didn't return it. At some point, you stop knocking on doors that only open when they need something. You stop rehearsing speeches in your head for people who will never really listen. You stop asking for space, and instead, you make your own. I didn't expect applause when I saved that campaign, but I didn't expect to be the one blamed when it fell apart either. The Monday it all unraveled was warm and cloudless, the kind of LA day people write songs about, but inside the office, everything felt colder. I was called into a last-minute meeting, HR, legal. My direct supervisor, Claire, sitting stiff in her chair like she already knew how this would go. No smiles, no how are yous, just a printed document on the table with my name on it and words like compliance issue, responsibility chain, and early termination. At first, I thought they were joking. I had overseen the creative. Yes, but the contract they claimed was violated, that wasn't even in my department. It had gone through legal. Someone had missed a line in a clause buried 3 pages deep, but I was the name at the top of the campaign deck, and they needed someone to answer for it. That someone was me. I looked at Claire, hoping she'd step in, that she'd say what we both knew, that I didn't sign those contracts, that she had approved the same brief, that we'd launched this thing together. But Claire didn't speak. She just looked away. All those nights we stayed late reviewing footage. All those weekends we worked through edits. I realized then they meant nothing to her, to them. I was never the voice of the campaign. I was just a convenient placeholder, easy to remove when things got complicated. They asked me to sign a release form. I did. They walked me to the elevator like a stranger. And just like that, after 8 years in this industry, I was out with a severance check, a quiet NDA, and a gut-deep silence no one warned me about. The betrayal wasn't dramatic. It was corporate, precise, a betrayal story packaged in neutral tone and legalese. I didn't cry. Not then. I walked through the lobby holding a box that didn't even carry all my work, just a few framed photos and notebooks they didn't bother to shred. Outside, the sunlight hit my face like it was trying to prove the day was still beautiful. I got into my car, closed the door, and sat there, engine off, windows up, for a long time. I didn't move. I wasn't stunned because I had lost my job. I was stunned because not one person, not Claire, not my team, not even the assistant I mentored had said, "This doesn't feel right." That night, I didn't tell my family. I didn't want to hear my mother's version of concern, the kind that sounds like criticism. I didn't want to hear Isabel say she was sorry in the same breath she reminded me how unstable creative fields can be. This wasn't just a job loss. It was the collapse of something I had built quietly, carefully, through every ignored holiday and skipped vacation, and no one not at work, not in my toxic family dynamic, cared enough to ask what I needed. The worst part was how fast it all faded. One day, you're the woman people thank in meetings, the one who makes the impossible happen. The next, your email is disabled, and your name disappears from the team Slack, just like in any emotional family drama. The silence that follows betrayal says more than the act itself. I wasn't even worth gossip. For days, I barely left my apartment. I scrolled through job listings, typed half-hearted cover letters, and deleted most before sending. My fridge was empty, but I didn't care. I had worked hard. I had played by the rules, and still, I was the one left cleaning up the mess. That was the real lesson of every true story. Revenge worth hearing being right doesn't mean you win. Then, out of nowhere, a message came. Miguel, a friend from my university days. He had seen a vague LinkedIn update and somehow read between the lines. "I don't know what happened," he wrote, "but if you need somewhere to reset, I have space in Santa Fe." It wasn't pity. It wasn't advice. It was just a door. Open. At first, I hesitated. I had lived in LA my whole adult life, but something about that offer, honest, undemanding, free of judgment, felt like a different kind of invitation, not a solution, but a pause, a way to stop running long enough to feel the ground again. So I packed 2 suitcases. I left the polished apartment, the faux urban coffee shops, the city where I had spent years proving myself to people who never planned to keep me. I left the awards, the campaign posters, the saved email chains from clients who once said I was irreplaceable. I took what mattered, my notebooks, my sketches, my voice. The drive east was long. Desert landscape stretched like memory raw, open, nothing to hide behind, somewhere between the California border and New Mexico hills. I realized something. I hadn't failed. I'd been released from a system that only applauded me when I was useful, from a family that only remembered me when it was convenient, from a version of myself that kept shrinking to fit rooms that never made space. When I arrived, Miguel met me with simple warmth, no big conversation, just, "You're safe here." And in that moment, I felt something shift, not anger, not despair, but quiet power, the kind that comes from knowing the worst already happened, and I was still standing. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of my family revenge arc, not through confrontation, but through clarity. I didn't need to prove anything to the people who let me fall. I just needed to build something they couldn't ignore, because sometimes the best revenge family story isn't about showing them what they lost. It's about creating a life so full, so real, so unmistakably your own, that their absence becomes irrelevant. Santa Fe didn't greet me with answers. It greeted me with space. That first morning in Miguel's guest room, I woke up before the sun rose and sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, unsure whether I felt empty or just finally quiet. The walls were bare, the sheets still stiff from detergent. But something about that silence made sense. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to apologize for how exhausted I felt. And for once, I didn't have to be useful to be allowed to exist. After years of working in a system that took everything and gave nothing back, and a lifetime inside a family that only acknowledged success if it fit their version of pride, this unfamiliar slowness felt like rebellion. Miguel didn't ask questions. He made coffee. He showed me where the towels were. Then he went to work and left me to breathe. That first week, I slept more than I had in months. I took long walks down dusty roads, past adobe houses and sunburnt fences, not thinking about marketing briefs or client revisions. I watched birds land on telephone wires. I stood in grocery store aisles, forgetting what I came in for. But slowly, the knots in my chest started to loosen. There were no meetings to attend, no calls to return, no family texts checking if I had found a job yet, which of course was never real concern, just another way to measure if I had earned my right to be part of the room. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just come from enemies. It comes from the people who smile while letting you drown. That's what I had lived through. A betrayal story that never made headlines, but left scars just the same. I wasn't broken because of a single blow. I was bruised from 1,000 tiny dismissals, from the way my family praised Isabel for baking cupcakes while ignoring the fact that I had led national campaigns, from the way Claire called me irreplaceable in front of clients, but never once defended me behind closed doors, from the way I was always the one to offer help, but never the one they offered space to. I started journaling, not because I had a plan, but because my thoughts needed somewhere to live besides my head. I filled pages with questions I couldn't answer. Why did being quiet mean being overlooked? Why did doing everything right still lead to being discarded? Why did my mother always find a room for my sister's friends, but ask me to stay at a hotel when I was the one driving 12 hours to visit? There were no dramatic revelations, just realizations that stung slow, that I had spent so much of my life performing worth for people who didn't know how to recognize it, that I had accepted being treated like a side note, then tried to prove I could be a headline, only to find myself written out again. The difference now was that no one was watching, and that, strangely, gave me power. When you've been erased, starting over feels less terrifying. I no longer cared what my resume said. I didn't want to climb another ladder just to be thrown off again. What I wanted was realness, a place to work where I didn't have to trade emotional bandwidth for paycheck approval, a space where stories still mattered. But the pressure to polish it until it was unrecognizable didn't. Miguel noticed I was sketching again. He asked, gently, if I'd be interested in helping him relaunch a tiny side business he had once tried to build years ago, a creative studio for emotional storytelling. No clients yet, no roadmap, just an idea to tell honest stories for brands that weren't trying to impress everyone, just connect with the right ones. I laughed when he suggested it. That sounds like a dream people don't get paid for. He shrugged. Maybe. But it's the first thing I've wanted to do in a long time. And I trust you. That last sentence stuck. It had been so long since anyone said that without strings attached. We called it Field Light, a soft name, one that didn't shout but glowed. The mission was simple: create human-first narratives in a world chasing trends. No inflated data decks, no viral at all cost strategies, just stories that felt true. The first client was a yoga therapist who had been burned by a previous agency. She cried in our second meeting, not because we pitched her something brilliant, but because we listened, really listened. And when that campaign launched, it didn't go viral, but it brought her clients who said they finally felt seen. For the first time, I wasn't working to prove anything. I was working to build something I believed in, Every email we sent, every script I shaped, every frame of every project, it all came from a different place now. Not desperation, not ambition, but clarity. I stopped checking LinkedIn. I stopped wondering if Claire had hired someone to replace me. I stopped hoping for a text from Isabel asking how I was doing. That was the moment I realized the emotional family drama I had been raised in wasn't something I needed to fix. It was something I needed to step out of. I didn't post about our work online. I didn't try to impress anyone. But still, word spread. A few clients turned into more. A small podcast asked to feature our story. A regional magazine listed Fieldlight as a studio to watch. And every time someone asked how we did it, I smiled and said, "We listen." I still think about my family sometimes. I wonder if they ever think about the time they asked me not to come to Christmas because Aunt Camilla wasn't comfortable with the tension. I wonder if my mother ever remembers that she booked a hotel room for me without asking how it would feel. Probably not, but that's okay, because I remember. And remembering isn't about bitterness. It's about knowing what shaped you and choosing not to be shaped by it anymore. This isn't the loud part of a revenge family story. This isn't where the music swells or the crowd cheers. This is the part people overlook: the rebuilding, the morning walks, the emails sent without expectation, the notebooks filled in silence. This is the part where the woman they forgot learns to remember herself. And that's where true story revenge begins. It started with a missed call from a number I hadn't saved, then a voicemail, my mother's voice, slightly breathless, overly polite in a way she only used when she needed something. "Hi, Salma. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to let you know we're planning a family trip this summer. Everyone will be there, your sister, Daniel, the kids, even Aunt Camila. We'd love to see you. Maybe you can host." That last part made me pause. Maybe you can host. As if they weren't just inviting me to join something, but suggesting I take care of it. I stared at the phone for a long time. My mother had never called to ask how I was doing after I left LA, never asked how I'd managed to land on my feet, how I was rebuilding a business from nothing. But now, suddenly, she remembered I existed because she wanted to use the house I had worked for in silence, the one she never knew existed until someone else mentioned it. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how to feel. There was a flicker of old instinct, the kind that used to hope maybe this time would be different, but it faded fast, because I could already see the pattern. This wasn't connection. It was convenience. They had skipped every chapter of the story where I struggled, but now they wanted to show up for the happy ending. A few days later, I got a message from Isabel. It was a photo of her kids holding beach towels, with the caption, "We can't wait to see Aunt Salma." No call, no apology, no mention of the fact that I hadn't been invited to their last 3 holidays. Just a photo, like it was already decided that I would say yes, that I would open my door and smile like nothing ever happened. That's how it always worked in a toxic family drama. They write their version of the story and expect you to act it out. They erase the betrayal and replace it with cheerful captions. And if you don't play along, you're the selfish one. But this time, I wasn't interested in being the accommodating daughter, the reliable sister, the one who helped clean up without being asked if she was tired. This time, I had something they couldn't take credit for, a life they didn't help build. So I waited. I didn't answer the call. I didn't return the message. I focused on Fieldlight. Our new campaign was launching, a collaboration with a domestic abuse survivor who had started her own nonprofit. She'd spent years being silenced, told she was dramatic, emotional, unstable. Her story resonated with me in ways I hadn't expected, not because I had experienced the same kind of trauma, but because I knew what it was like to be discredited by the people closest to you. To be told your memory was exaggerated, that your experience didn't count because it made others uncomfortable. We filmed her in her own kitchen, no makeup, no scripted lines, just her voice, steady and slow. The campaign wasn't flashy, but when it launched, the comments flooded in, not likes, not shares, just people saying, "Thank you. This feels like me." It reminded me why I had chosen this path. I didn't need to be applauded anymore. I just needed to tell the truth. A week later, my mother called again. This time she didn't bother with small talk. "Salma, have you been getting our messages? We're finalizing the travel plans. Everyone is excited. We thought maybe we could spend the long weekend at your place." The way she said your place made it sound like a rental on Airbnb, not the home I had sacrificed years to earn. I asked her calmly, "Did you ever think to ask if that was something I wanted?" She hesitated. "Well, we just assumed. You have space now, and the kids haven't seen you in so long." That was true. They hadn't seen me, but not because I was hiding, because no one had looked. I said, as gently as I could, "I'm not hosting this time." There was a pause. "Why not?" she asked, the tone already shifting. "Because this isn't a reunion," I replied. "This is a request for convenience, and I've learned the difference." She didn't respond, just a long breath. Then, "That's disappointing." "Salma." I almost laughed. Disappointing. As if I hadn't spent 30 years being disappointed by people who couldn't even remember which day I moved apartments, let alone what I was working on. I said nothing more, just, "Take care," and I ended the call. Later that night, I saw a Facebook post from Isabel, a photo of a beach bag packed and ready, with the caption, "When your own family makes you feel like a guest, you find your own way to the sun. No tags, no names." But the intent was clear. I was supposed to feel guilty. I was supposed to feel like the difficult one. But I didn't. I felt clear. Because in every betrayal story, there's a turning point. The moment you stop wanting an apology and start protecting your peace. This was mine. The moment I chose not to open the door just because they finally knocked. The moment I remembered I was the one who had built the house, and that gave me the right to decide who stepped inside. In the weeks that followed, I stopped answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I poured myself into work. Fieldlight signed 2 new clients. We started mentoring young storytellers who had been pushed out of bigger agencies for not being a culture fit. I gave them laptops. I gave them space. I gave them the kind of support I had needed and never received. That was the beginning of my real family revenge, not by confronting them, not by exposing every painful memory, but by refusing to keep making space for people who only showed up when it suited them. It was about becoming the version of myself I would have admired if I had seen her growing up, someone who didn't settle for crumbs, someone who made her own table. They say revenge is best served cold. I don't believe that. I think the best revenge is served quietly, consistently, without needing anyone else to witness it. It's not a scream. It's a life that speaks for itself, and mine was just beginning to speak clearly. It was 2 weeks before Christmas when the third phone call came. This time it wasn't my mother or Isabel. It was Daniel. I hadn't spoken to him directly in years. His voice was calm, transactional, like a man trying to fix a minor inconvenience. "Hey, Salma. Listen, we were talking and thought maybe this year we could all come spend Christmas with you. You know, mix it up a little. Warmer weather, change of scenery. We've already looked at flights." The way he said it, so casual, so decided, made something shift inside me. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a request. It was an announcement wrapped in entitlement. And just like that, I knew. They hadn't learned anything. They still believed I was the same woman who used to sleep on the family couch without complaint, the one who cleared plates and kept her stories to herself. They thought because I had a house now, and some sunshine, and rooms they hadn't seen, I'd say yes like always, that I'd open the door and pretend we'd never gone years without a single call that wasn't about convenience. But they didn't know who I had become. I let him talk. He went on about how the kids were excited, how they'd bought matching swimsuits, how it would be great for family unity. The word unity almost made me laugh. Where was that unity when I needed help after I lost my job? Where was it when I was grieving the loss of a career I'd built from the ground up? While they were posting vacation photos and tagging each other in holiday meals, I was never invited to. I wasn't bitter. But I wasn't blind either. When he paused, I answered simply, I won't be hosting Christmas this year. There was silence on the other end. I could hear the surprise, then a chuckle that didn't quite land. Oh, come on, don't be like that. The house has space. It'll be fun. We've already packed, I repeated. I'm not hosting, and I didn't agree to this. He sighed, like I was being unreasonable. Salma, they've already booked the flights. It's kind of late to change plans now. Then you probably should have asked before booking them. I said, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself. I didn't try to soften it, and it felt like freedom. That night, I turned off my phone and sat in my living room, looking at the decorations I'd put up with care. The tree was small but meaningful, filled with handmade ornaments from a local artist. There were no gifts under it yet, no chaos, no noise, just light and quiet and peace I had earned. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. But I did feel something heavy lift, the realization that I didn't owe them access to my life just because they finally realized it had value. Over the next few days, the messages came in waves. Isabel sent a text. Mom said you refused. Is this a joke? We're family. Then another. You're acting like a stranger. It's Christmas. Then, are you really doing this to the kids? I didn't answer any of them. Not because I didn't care, but because I had finally learned that explaining your boundaries to people who never respected them isn't clarity. It's a trap. They weren't trying to understand me. They were trying to wear me down. A part of me wondered if they sat together that night, blaming me for the plans falling apart. I imagined the conversations, Mom calling me selfish, Isabel playing the victim, Aunt Camila making her usual remarks about how I'd always been difficult. But the more I thought about it, the less it mattered. Their version of me was outdated, and I was done shrinking myself to fit inside it. Instead, I focused on the life I had built. Fieldlight had just wrapped a campaign for a small school in Albuquerque working with underprivileged kids. The video we produced had gone modestly viral, not by chasing shock value, but by capturing a real story of transformation. A teacher who had stayed in the classroom for 35 years, showing up every day for children the system ignored, watching the comments roll in, people sharing their own stories about forgotten mentors and life-changing teachers. I felt proud, not for the views, but for the meaning, for doing work that mattered. The kind of work no one in my family had ever cared to ask about. A week before Christmas, I threw a small dinner for our team. We were just 6 people now. No lavish decorations, no speeches, just food, conversation, and stories shared without competition. Miguel raised a glass and said, "To the year we stopped pretending and started building." I smiled, not because it was a celebration, but because it was true. Later that night, I scrolled through social media. Curious, Isabel had posted a family photo in matching sweaters. Everyone gathered around the tree in our parents' living room, but the expressions were stiff. My mother's smile didn't reach her eyes. Daniel looked tired. The kids looked distracted. The caption read, "Family is everything even when it's complicated." That was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever get, and it still wasn't much. But I didn't need more. I didn't need an apology wrapped in half-meaningful captions. I didn't need an invite that came only when they wanted something. What I had now was clarity, and clarity was power in every revenge family story. There comes a moment when the roles reverse, when the one who used to chase becomes the one they can't reach. This was that moment. They didn't know how to respond to my silence because they were used to me explaining. They didn't know how to handle my peace because they were used to my compliance. But that was no longer my role. The best kind of emotional family drama doesn't end in a blow-up. It ends in a door that stays closed, not out of hatred, but because you finally realize not every knock deserves to be answered. My story wasn't about vengeance. It was about balance. I hadn't slammed any doors. I just locked the ones they had walked through too many times without care. They taught me how to live without their approval. They just didn't realize I'd get so good at it. The funny thing about silence is how loud it becomes when people aren't getting what they want. A few days after Christmas, the calls stopped, the texts faded, the guilt tactics lost steam, and in their place came the most familiar sound of all nothing, not a message, not a follow-up, not a single moment of reflection from the people who once claimed I was family. That was their pattern. When control didn't work, they disappeared. And this time, I didn't go chasing. January came with clean air and new energy. Field Light was gaining traction. We had signed a local museum as a storytelling partner, working on a short film to highlight overlooked artists. We weren't making headlines, but we were building something real. One of our interns, a young woman named Kay, pulled me aside one afternoon after a client presentation. "I just want to say, I've never seen someone like you in this role. You don't raise your voice, but everyone listens." I smiled, not because it was a compliment, but because it reminded me of everything I had once believed I had to change about myself to be taken seriously. My quiet had once been ignored. Now it was leadership. That's the shift no one teaches you to expect in a revenge family story, the part where what they mocked becomes the very thing that sets you apart. Around that same time, I received a package in the mail. No return name, but the handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. My mother's. Inside was a card, a printed photo of Isabel's kids in front of a school project board titled "Our Family Tree" in the corner. My name was written in small, uneven letters. No message, no apology, just an image that said, "You're still part of us," without ever acknowledging the years they had spent proving otherwise. I sat with that photo for a long time. Part of me wanted to cry, but not from sadness, from exhaustion, from the realization that this was the closest thing to an olive branch I would ever get a passive-aggressive gesture wrapped in nostalgia, as if inclusion could erase exclusion, as if a photo could rewrite years of neglect. That's the heartbreak of any emotional family drama. Not the moment you're cut out, but the moment they pretend it never happened. I didn't call her. I didn't write back, because by now, I understood the difference between reconciliation and performance. This wasn't healing. It was damage control. That same week, Field Light was nominated for a regional creative award. A quiet campaign we had done for a women's shelter had caught the attention of an industry committee. It wasn't the kind of project that trends, but it had substance. We had told real stories, honored real voices, and refused to oversell the pain just to make a brand look charitable. When I walked onto that stage to accept the plaque, I didn't think about revenge. I thought about the couch I used to sleep on at Christmas, the hotel room I once cried in alone, the dinner tables where no one asked how I was doing. And I smiled, not because I had won something, but because I was no longer waiting to be seen by people who never wanted to see me. After the ceremony, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. Saw the feature online. Proud of you. It was from Isabel. No context, no punctuation. Just 7 words that carried all the weight of years she had spent diminishing everything I did. That was her version of reaching out. I could have responded. I could have opened the door a crack, but I didn't. Because what they were proud of now had only happened because I had stepped away from them. That's the part most people forget in a true story revenge. You don't owe access to the parts of your life that bloomed in their absence. A week later, Miguel and I were having lunch after a planning session. He leaned back in his chair, watching me for a moment before asking, "Do you ever think they'll really understand what they did?" I thought about it. "No," I said, "but that's not the point anymore." He nodded. "You don't look like someone who needs their understanding anyway." And he was right. The closure I had spent so long chasing had become irrelevant. The apology I thought would bring peace had lost its power. What mattered now was the life I was living, not the one I had been denied, but the one I had designed, deliberately, brick by brick, with every no I had once been too afraid to say. That's the thing they never tell you in a betrayal story. The real triumph isn't loud. It doesn't always look like revenge. It looks like waking up in a house you chose. It looks like building a team that values silence as much as they value sound. It looks like saying, "I'm not available," and not explaining why. It looks like freedom without fanfare, power without permission. Sometimes I still catch myself remembering a holiday moment, a missed birthday, a memory of sitting at the far end of the table, trying to insert one sentence into a conversation that had no space for me. But then I look around. The warmth in this room, the calm in my own chest, the projects that live because I said yes to myself instead of waiting for theirs. And I realize this is it. This is the part no one gets to claim but me. In every family revenge arc, there comes a chapter where you no longer need anyone to lose for you to win. You stop keeping score. You stop waiting for the ones who watched you fall to say, "We were wrong," because by then, you've already proven you were right by surviving, by thriving, by choosing peace over proof. And in that choice, you become untouchable. The message came in the middle of a meeting. Short, direct, no greeting. "Can we talk? It's about Sophia." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, letting the name settle. Sophia, Isabel's daughter, my niece, the same niece whose birthdays I had never been invited to, the same child who had been raised hearing her mother describe me as distant, complicated, too focused on work. I hadn't heard anything about her in months. And now suddenly, Isabel wanted to talk. I put the phone down and went back to the meeting. That evening, curiosity got the better of me. I responded, "What's going on?" Her reply came quickly. "She's applying for summer internships. She wants to go into media. She said she really admires what you're doing, thinks you're cool. She's hoping you can talk to her, maybe mentor her, maybe even bring her on." I read that message 5 times, not because it shocked me, but because it confirmed what I had suspected all along. They hadn't reached out because they missed me. They reached out because now I had something they wanted. For a moment, I considered what it would have meant to my younger self to have someone like me reach back, someone who had lived through betrayal, rejection, the invisible corners of toxic family dynamics, someone who had carved her own lane, someone who had learned how to survive without applause. I thought about Sophia, who was still young, probably still absorbing the world in wide-eyed pieces, not yet realizing how many stories go untold within the walls of a family that only uplifts what makes them look good. Then I thought about Isabel, the woman who had once told me I was selfish for not attending her baby shower, the woman who had posted about ungrateful siblings during the holiday I spent crying alone in a hotel, the woman who couldn't bother to ask how I was doing when I lost my job, but was now comfortable sliding into my inbox as if those years of silence meant nothing. That's what makes a betrayal story sting long after the betrayal ends. Not just the original wound, but the way people expect you to forget it when it no longer serves them. I didn't answer that night. I let the message sit. I let myself feel everything: irritation, irony, a small twinge of regret that I had missed years of watching Sophia grow up. But mostly, I felt calm, because this wasn't a test. It was proof that the power dynamic had shifted, that the sister who once made me feel like an outsider now needed a door I had built myself. The next day, I called her. I didn't pretend to be thrilled. I didn't offer small talk. I just said, "Tell me what Sophia wants, not what you want." Isabel paused. It was the first time in a long time I'd spoken to her without trying to make things easier for both of us. She said Sophia was struggling to find a program that would take her seriously, that she was smart but shy, good at writing, curious about storytelling. "She's actually a lot like you," she added, as if that would sweeten the ask. I said, "I'll talk to her. One call, no promises. I wasn't doing it for Isabel. I was doing it for Sophia, because I knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to have potential buried under assumptions and dismissive smiles, and I refused to pass that down." The next week, I scheduled a video call with Sophia. She was nervous, polite, and surprisingly honest. She said she followed Fieldlight's work and loved how we told quiet stories that still made people feel something. That phrase stuck with me. Quiet stories. That's what my life had become. Not loud, not public, but full of weight and meaning. She asked smart questions. She listened when I spoke. She didn't ask about the family, just about the work. When the call ended, I told her I'd think about it. Then I sat at my desk and asked myself the harder question. Could I mentor her without reopening old wounds? Could I help someone from the very world that once tried to erase me? Could I give without being pulled back in? The answer, surprisingly, was yes, because I wasn't the same person anymore. My boundaries weren't made of bitterness. They were made of wisdom, and they were firm. So I offered Sophia a trial assignment, just one. I told her I'd treat her like any other intern. She agreed, gratefully, no ego, no expectation. And as the weeks passed, I saw pieces of myself in her, not the polished version, the earlier one, the girl who just needed one person to believe her voice mattered. That's where a real revenge family story transforms, when you realize your healing can become someone else's beginning, not as a lesson, not as an act of sainthood, but as a choice. I didn't need to get even with Isabel. I didn't need her apology. The fact that she had to come to me, that was enough. She sent a thank you text a few weeks later. It was brief, vague, just like always. But this time, I didn't feel small reading it. I felt solid. I had chosen my own integrity over my history, and that was more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could ever be. The day Sophia turned in her first project, she attached a note. "Thank you for making space. I've never felt like I had one before." I sat with that line longer than I expected, because I knew exactly what she meant. You don't need a seat at their table when you've already built your own. The email was formal, impersonal, and completely unexpected. It came from a name I hadn't seen in years, Claire, My old manager from LA, the same woman who had sat silently in that HR meeting while they walked me out like I hadn't carried that team for 3 years. She wrote like nothing had ever happened. Hi, Salma. I've been following your work at Fieldlight. Impressive growth. We're launching a new emotional branding division and would love to explore a strategic partnership. Let's talk soon. I reread it 3 times, not because I didn't understand what she was asking, but because I couldn't believe the audacity. She hadn't spoken a word to defend me when I was made the scapegoat for a failed campaign. She didn't send a message when I left the city. She had erased me as cleanly as a name deleted from a whiteboard, and now that I had turned that erasure into something they couldn't ignore, she wanted a meeting. That's how it always happens in a betrayal story that turns. They don't come back with apologies. They come back with proposals. I didn't respond right away. I closed the email and walked outside. It was late afternoon in Santa Fe, the sky layered in soft blue and burnt orange, the air sharp with winter. I thought about all the nights I had doubted myself after they fired me, the days I couldn't get out of bed, the months I'd spent rebuilding my voice without validation. They didn't see any of that. They didn't care then, but now that it looked polished on the outside, they wanted a piece of it. The next morning, I drafted a reply. It was short, polite, but clear. Thanks for reaching out. Fieldlight is currently focused on independent growth and mission-aligned partnerships. At this time, we're not pursuing collaborations with firms that previously misaligned with our values. I didn't name names. I didn't spell out the past. I didn't need to. The subtext was enough. You don't get to erase me and then ask me to light the way forward. It felt like closing a door I didn't even realize was still open. Not out of resentment, out of clarity. And it changed something in me. I'd spent so long trying to prove that what they did was wrong, but now I didn't need to. My work spoke for itself. The very version of me they dismissed had become the one they needed. That's not magic. That's what real family revenge looks like. You don't just rise. You rise in a way that makes them realize they lost access, not because you punished them, but because you healed. 2 weeks later, I was invited to speak on a panel about ethical storytelling. It wasn't a flashy conference, just a gathering of creatives, founders, and brand leaders who wanted to do things differently. I shared the Fieldlight journey. I didn't talk about being fired. I didn't name Claire or the company that discarded me. I talked about what it means to lead without ego, to prioritize people over performance, to build something you believe in, even when no one's watching. When I finished, someone in the audience stood up. How do you stay grounded when the people who once ignored you try to come back? I smiled. You remember who you were when they left, and you protect her. That night, I returned home to a message from Sophia. She had completed her 3-month internship with us and wanted to stay. She didn't ask for special treatment. She just said, I feel like I belong here, and I want to learn more. I added her to the team that week, not because she was family, but because she had earned it, and that was the real turning point in my revenge family story. When I realized that giving someone else the thing I was once denied didn't make me weak, it made me whole. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten from my mother. It was 5 pages long, carefully folded. The handwriting slanted, but familiar. She didn't apologize directly, not once. She didn't say she was wrong or that she should have treated me better. But she wrote about her own childhood, about how she had never felt seen by her parents either, about how watching Sophia thrive in my orbit had made her think, maybe I didn't understand you. She wrote, maybe I still don't, but I see what you've built, and it's beautiful. That was it. No apology, but a kind of acknowledgement. And strangely, I didn't need more. Because sometimes the real power in an emotional family drama is realizing you no longer crave resolution from the people who caused the pain. Their silence no longer defines you. Their validation no longer feeds you. You learn to write your own ending, and it doesn't need to include everyone who was in the first chapter. Field Light grew slowly, intentionally. We weren't chasing scale. We were curating impact, and people began to notice. Clients who once wouldn't return our calls now asked to be on our wait list. Organizations who had passed me over now referenced our campaigns in their boardrooms. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was undeniable. And when Isabel called one night this time just to say thank you, I listened. She didn't ask for anything. She just said, "I've been watching. You're doing something that matters." I didn't say I forgave her. I didn't say she was wrong. I just said, "Thanks." Because sometimes peace isn't about reconciliation. It's about recognition, the kind that comes too late to fix the past, but just in time to prove you've moved beyond it. The year Field Light turned 3. I threw a gathering at my home in Santa Fe. It wasn't a party. Not really. Just a dinner. A long table under string lights in the backyard. Mismatched chairs. Food made by hands that had known both hunger and healing. I invited the team, our collaborators, and a few of the local creators we'd supported over the years. People came from different cities, bringing stories, bringing history. What they shared in common wasn't resume polish or family connections. They were people who had once been overlooked, underestimated, or written off. And they were the kind of people who knew how to listen. I stood in the kitchen hours before guests arrived, watching the light move across the floor. My house was warm now, not just in color or temperature, but in energy. It had become the space I used to dream about when I slept on couches during holidays, a place where no one had to ask permission to be themselves, a place where people were valued for who they were, not for how conveniently they fit someone else's expectations. Miguel came early to help set up. He brought flowers and a playlist and didn't ask about logistics. He just knew what the night meant, not a celebration of success, but a quiet moment of arrival, not a finish line, just proof that a life built on your own terms could hold its weight. Sophia showed up with 2 trays of desserts she had made herself. She wore a simple dress, her face flushed with the nervousness of someone who had once felt invisible, but now belonged. She handed me a note, folded in half. I didn't read it right away. I tucked it into my jacket pocket and smiled. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. She already had. As people filled the yard, I watched from the doorway. There was laughter, music, clinking glasses, and something else I couldn't name. Not joy, not pride, something quieter. The sense that the room, this space I had built with my own time, sweat, grief, and clarity had made room for all the people the world had tried to sideline. It was a different kind of family, one chosen not by blood, but by belief, and every one of them had once stood where I did, pushed aside, underestimated, told they weren't enough. Later that night, after the table had been cleared and most guests had left, I sat alone on the porch, the note from Sophia still in my pocket. I opened it slowly. Her handwriting was neat, but uneven in places. Thank you for showing me that peace doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from accepting yourself so deeply that their rejection stops being personal. I hope one day I can build something as honest as you have. I read it twice, then a third time, not because it surprised me, but because it reminded me that legacy isn't something you plan. It's something you live into, day by day, by being who you needed when no one else showed up. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a message ping on my phone. I didn't check it. I had a feeling who it might be. my mother, perhaps Isabel, maybe even Claire again, but I didn't need to know, because by now I had learned that the final chapter in a revenge family story isn't about who finally calls you. It's about who you no longer wait to hear from. This journey didn't end in fireworks. It didn't end with someone falling at my feet begging for forgiveness. It ended with me no longer needing them to. That was the power. That was the win. I didn't just survive what they did. I built something better because of it. That's what real emotional family drama teaches you. That revenge doesn't have to destroy. It can rebuild. It can restore. It can evolve into a life so real and grounded that their opinions become background noise. And maybe the deepest act of family revenge is not cutting people off with fury. It's living so fully that they no longer get to write your story. Not even a paragraph. Not even a sentence. The next morning, I walked through the house, barefoot, coffee in hand. I passed the photos on the shelf. None of them were of the past. No old holidays, no childhood flashbacks, just moments from the last few years. Our first campaign launch, a late-night brainstorm that turned into a breakthrough. The day we signed our first national client, the quiet wins, the real ones. I stood by the window and thought about all the years I tried to squeeze myself into rooms that were too small for me. All the times I had settled for less than I deserved just to keep the peace. All the holidays I had spent trying to feel worthy in a family that made it clear I was only wanted when I was useful. And I whispered, not to them, but to myself, there's room now, and it's mine. If you're watching this because you've been the forgotten one, the overlooked one, the one who stayed quiet too long, I want to tell you something. You're not hard to love. You're just around people who don't know how. You're not asking for too much. You're just asking the wrong people. And maybe the closure you've been chasing isn't out there in some perfect apology. Maybe it's inside the life you're meant to create once you stop waiting for them to invite you in. So here's my question to you. Now that you know what the door feels like when it only opens out of convenience, what kind of door will you build for yourself? Because one day they'll come knocking, and this time you'll get to decide whether you answer.